Hi, this is a mini lecture for Chapter 2 um, from your Org B textbook. Chapter 2 looks at some of the challenges that managers in organizations face. Now, these are just some of the challenges, not all of them. Here are the learning outcomes, or what you should learn by reading this chapter or listening to this presentation or mini lecture. You can pause it here and read them if you'd like. All right, the first piece we're going to look at is factors that affect organizations that compete in a global economy. So an organization is a business or a nonprofit, and a global economy is, looking at a worldwide view of business. So some of the three main challenges that are outlined in your text are globalization, diversity, and ethics. And we'll talk about each of them here in a minute. So globalization refers to a world free from national boundaries, or really how, and you see this every day, how the world that we live in interacts with each other. I think you can go in your house or look in your closet and you can see multiple items that were not made in the United States. So a transnational organization is one that has a global viewpoint, and their global viewpoint is supersedes or is more preferred than looking at just national issues. A lot of times companies that have a global viewpoint or do business in multiple countries are called global or multinational companies. Right. There's also a lot of social and political changes that are happening in the world, and this is always changing. These are just some of the things that I mentioned in your text. But really, you have to just kind of stay up on current events to know what's happening in our worldwide economy. So, social and political changes have an impact on how we do business. The Chinese use a term called guangxi, which is a practice to build better social exchanges and networks. But a big thing is we look at when we're looking at globalization is trade barriers. And trade barriers come in the forms of tariffs, which are basically like a tax imposed on items coming from a different country, or non-tariff barriers. And some of them are things like you can only import so much of a certain product. That's a quota. And there's others as well. And we can get into that more in another chapter. So when we look at doing business globally, we have to understand different cultures. Um, you know, Even within our national economy, we have different subcultures within different states, within different regions of the states, and among different groups. So we have to understand cultures. One thing that some countries or some companies do is they send managers to work in another country. This person is called an expatriate. There's a lot of um, it's very hard to be an expat. They call them an expat because you're leaving your home country and what you know to go live and work somewhere else. And it can be very hard on the family as well. International executives are people who have jobs with an international scope, but they're not necessarily an expat. Um, you can also understand different cultures by something called decentralization. Decentralization is when you give decision-making powers to others outside of your maybe corporate office. So, for example, if you own a company and you have a branch in Japan, you would let your managers in Japan make decisions because they understand the culture of Japan. One thing that actually this is really useful, and we'll talk about all of these, but Hofstede's dimensions of cultural differences really helps us to understand the cultural differences between companies. And I'll put a link to this on Canvas because it's super interesting. And so some of the things that we look at are individualism versus collectivism. So in the United States, primarily, in general, in the United States, people are part of loose social frameworks, and their primary concern is for oneself and one's family. Now, this isn't everybody. It's just saying that the United States scores very high on an individualistic side versus the collectivist side. The collectivist side, collectivism says that individuals belong to a tightly knit social framework, and there's more dependence on extended families. There's a high regard for group decisions. It's really more about looking at what's best for the group as a whole versus what is best for oneself. All right, the next one of Hofstede's dimensions is power distance. Power distance is the degree to which a culture accepts unequal distribution of power. So an unequal distribution of power or a country that has a high power distance would would have a lot of respect for their elders, or they would have a lot of respect for individuals with authority. In some places, however, there isn't this power distance. Everybody's kind of viewed as more equal, no matter their title or age, etc. There's uncertainty avoidance is the next one. This is the degree to which a culture tolerates ambiguity or uncertainty. So some countries are going to have a higher tolerance for uncertainty, and other cultures are going to have a lower tolerance for uncertainty. All right. There's also masculine versus femininity. So masculinity is a culture where assertiveness and materialism are more valued, and in a more and femininity is a cultural orientation or a culture where people value relationships and empathy. And empathy is really just putting ourselves in the shoes of others, trying to understand other people. Time orientation identifies whether a culture um, identifies whether a culture's values are future oriented or past and present oriented. So, are you looking to the future? Are you trying to plan ahead, or are you just living in the present? For example, in Mexico, it's much more present oriented. So so saving money isn't as valued as it might be in a culture like Germany. All right, so the next area we're going to look at is describing the challenges and positive influences of diversity. So, what is diversity? So, diversity is all the things that make us different. It could be our culture, it could be our gender, it could be our age, it could be our abilities, our religion, our social status, our sexual orientation, um, our race, our ethnicity. And then there's two types of diversity. There's surface level, and those are the things we can see. I can see whether you're old or young. I can usually tell whether you're male or female. I can see in general what is the what is the color of your skin, or what race you may belong to. Um, versus deep level diversity, which is going to be things like my values, my morals, the things you can't see about me. So ethnic diversity, when we look at that, some of the challenges are that when we look at culture, we have to understand each other's cultures, especially when we're doing business with other cultures. Um, but sometimes we have prejudices and stereotypes and biases that may prevent managers, employees from developing interactions which could benefit the organizations. And we all experience this in every aspect of our lives. Every person is experiences some prejudices or stereotypes in their life, or bias against them, whether it's because of your gender or your sexual orientation or your religious beliefs or your ethnicity or your race or your age. Um, everybody has a bias. Everybody has a bias as well. One of the things that we talk about is implicit bias, and that's this idea that we have biases even if we don't know we have them. And so there are things we can do to identify what our biases are. Gender can be an issue. In general, women are paid less than men in the United States. There's this idea of the glass ceiling, which is really this barrier that prevents women from rising above a certain level in organizations. You'll even see that many CEOs are not women or people who, or should I say people of color. Many are still white males. Age, there is actually age discrimination in the workplace. Um, Sometimes companies, and it's actually illegal, but companies will, in the past especially, have let go of people who are older and let go by layoff because they cost more money because they've been there longer. And then they hire younger people that cost less. But age and having that wisdom has a real positive impact on organizations' profitability. And we need people of various genders and abilities and ages to be able to make up a good workplace that has a variety of viewpoints. Abilities. Under the Americans with Disabilities Act of 1992, it says that employers must make reasonable recommendations for individuals with disabilities. So, for example, if somebody is in a wheelchair, they would either need to have access to an elevator or need to have a office or a workplace in an area that didn't require them to use steps. And it's reasonable accommodations. If somebody has a light sensitivity, then they should have an office area that is conducive to their lighting needs, but the whole office would not necessarily need to be like that. So, and I think it's important to understand that everybody does have different abilities, and there are a lot more diagnosed. I don't really like the term disabilities, but I'll use it. There are a lot more disabilities that are diagnosed. And it doesn't necessarily mean that individuals aren't successful. There are a lot of quote unquote disabilities that have a lot of positive aspects that make people very good contributors to a work environment. All right. So, benefits and problems of diversity. We want to have a diverse workforce because it attracts and retains good talent, and we want different viewpoints. It improves our marketing efforts, it promotes creativity and innovation, it helps with problem solving, it enhances the organization. It's better to have different perspectives and skill sets in your organization. However, some people resist change. Um, there might be a lack of cohesiveness. There may be communication problems, especially in a global context where you may have language barriers. There may be interpersonal conflicts because, not everybody is going to get along, and sometimes you might have slower decision making. But overall, the benefits far outweigh the problems associated with diversity. All right, so next we're going to look at ethics, character, and personal integrity in the organization. Right, so there's some different ethical theories. Consequential theory basically says that there are consequences that are a result of behaviors. The rule-based theory emphasizes the character of the act rather than its effect, basically. And then the character theory emphasizes the character, personal virtues, and intent of the individual. So there are ethical dilemmas every day that everybody faces, but managers especially. One is technology and privacy. We experience this every day in our lives, even as a consumer. So with technology comes many great things, but it also is another way that people can, um, try to steal data, or try to, we have people who try to hack into computers. It's, we want to make sure we keep people's data private. I think that you see this every day. Imagine you're on social media and you see an ad and you're like, oh, that's crazy that there's an ad for this product that I just looked up online yesterday. Well, actually, that's because the search engines and the social media sites are actually tracking what you're looking at, and then they're targeting their ads towards you. And that's an ethical dilemma that some people say, oh, that's fine if they do that, and some people say that is really wrong. Confidentiality, we have a lot of laws that deal with confidentiality, especially related to personal